just tells me all these things. All right, I think we are live. Hello and welcome. This is the inaugural live broadcast of my new up-and-coming podcast called Be in the Room. Be in the Room is an exploration, a discussion of things that have come out of Create the Rules Catalyst over the last 15 months that we have been in the room. Things that I've been observing and noticing about how we are in community and how we are a part of community, the roles that we're in community, and what we do when we are both giving actively into the community, receiving actively into the community, and then like what happens in that space in between and how we show up. So I am joined here by the amazing Greta Lax. And I was saying to Greta earlier, it was so great when I was like, I'm going to start a new podcast. Greta was like, and I'm going to apply, and it was great. And then everybody else is just sort of quiet. So I was like really extremely thankful for Greta to jump on here as we do our inaugural, both for Nourish the Risk Takers and Be in the Room. Welcome, Greta. Do you want to give yourself a little introduction about what you do and how how you came to be on this podcast today, other than I invited you?
I'd love to. Thank you. How exciting to be the inaugural on the inaugural podcast as well. So how did I come to be here? So I am a coach and consultant that specializes in DEI, and really my passion, while I do some general consulting, is working with individuals, with leaders in particular, but that can also include other coaches, consultants, DEI practitioners, to help them in the professional development that is going to prepare them to be more confident and more effective in doing DEI work. So it's kind of that foundational piece that is going to help them play their role. You talked about, in the room kind of being about the roles that we play. And that's one of the pieces that I help folks do. It was kind of a long journey in terms of how I got here. But part of it was, over the last few years, I made a big transition into owning my own business and working that way, and was incredibly fortunate to be somehow connected to, I'll have to go back and see, I'm not even sure how I found you, Marisa, but be connected to the Catalyst, which has been really a critical resource and really important community for me and my development over the last couple of years.
So I love what you said about, leaders being kind of ready to go into this kind of role. And these are conversations that we've been having over the last 15 months, definitely within the Catalyst, about, especially diversity, inclusion. What does inclusivity actually look like? What does accessibility look like? And, bringing it from these kind of like overreaching ideas or topics and actually applying them in the everyday, because it's really important as we build, it's really important to me that as we build the Catalyst, we have these ideas in our mind, but we also are actively participating in both the development and the integration of these. So taking it from the ideas to the actual implementation. And I think it's been interesting watching the culture develop and be created by the community in asking to be an active participant in both recognizing that diversity exists and that we are active participants in inclusivity and inclusion and all of the accessibility every time we show up in the room. Do you want to give me kind of some ideas, what you've seen in the Catalyst about that? You've seen it in place. I think you have.
So I think in terms of what that looks like in the room, is really just the openness of the folks who are there to pitch in, to participate, to be a part of it, but also the fact that it gives you space when you are not there and you're not ready. Because that's where I was when I first came in. I was completely overwhelmed, not by the space, but by the transition that I was making and what it meant to me. So I was a little bit more hesitant to kind of jump in and dive in, and that was okay. And folks, kind of reached out and helped connect and make sure that when I was ready, I was there, and you reached out, and would kind of check in. And so that when I was ready, I know that you were there to help out.
Somebody recently said to me actually that they haven't come into the workroom because I feel like they have to have this like big idea already figured out. I'm like, no, just come in while you're like doing nothing. Sometimes, just being in the catalyst when I'm cleaning or, laying down has been amazing, because I also have learned or I've experienced interactions and collaborations and connections in there. And that's where I'm starting to think of it. Like I see this, like we can be in the room without having to work, which I think is something that we can discuss both in the work that you do, but also your lived experience, like where we just always bring it down to like, what kind of work are we doing? And I hesitate because I asked you, I said, Greta, do you want to talk about who you are and what you do in the world? And I hate that. I actually hate that question, because I think we're so much more than the work we do. But I love when our work is a part of who we are, not just something we have to do. I know that's like very aspirational, like everybody has a job that they want to do or that contributes to their life. I know that not everybody's there, has the capacity. We haven't built a world where that is absolutely easy to do. But I love the idea when we are. So I hate asking that's like, what do you do? Or, why are you here? I always like to hear what people are. So Greta, just who are you when you're not working?
And I'm not working. That's an interesting question. And I've been through this at various stages in my career, had those reminders that you have to figure out who we are outside of the role. And especially as someone with chronic illness, chronic pain, and multiple disabilities, that changes also your outlook, because if your identity is entirely wrapped up in the work and you can't do the work, or you can't do it in the ways that you want to, that furthers the problem that's created kind of right under capitalism, that we are what we do.
Yeah.
So I'm totally avoiding the question, but I'm going to get there, I promise. So I am I'm a very small town girl raised in Wisconsin. I have had lots of opportunities over the years, though, to get out and experience different families, different cultures, different ways that people live and act and believe in the world. And all of those have helped nurture me into nurture the aspects of me that have always been interested in people, and not just the similarities between us, but the differences between us, and been just always super curious and wanting to learn about other people, and what's behind that. So including it up to being a foreign exchange student my senior year of high school. So I was 16 years old and going to a foreign country on my own, right? I was in Brazil. I lived in Brazil for just shy of a year through the Rotary Exchange program. And they were wonderful, and the Rotary organization was wonderful. And I was still a 16-year-old who had 2 years of high school Spanish, now in a country that spoke Portuguese.
And they have some similar, but they're not the same.
Oh, not the same. No.
Yep.
Yes. And if it's kind of one of those where if you speak Portuguese, it tends to be a little bit easier to understand Spanish than the other way around, at least kind of depending on the way you learned Portuguese, but quite often ways it's spoken, it's all strung together and the consonants aren't as separate. So it was a little bit harder going that direction. Yeah. Beyond the regional differences. But by the time I left, people were assuming I came from the south of Brazil, which is a whole other story, because, that's where the folks running away from Germany after the World War went and settled in the south of Brazil. So, right. But I looked like somebody who might have come from the south of Brazil. Anyway, so my experiences included that. And then I spent most of the last 20 years actually living in Akron, Ohio. And the last decade plus there spent in a role where I was really working in community. I was a connector between the university and the community, and got to spend a lot of time around tables with folks who had very different lived experiences from me, working alongside them, learning from them, and doing what I could to support the work that, was important to them in the community. So all of those were really important aspects of my development along the way. My educational background is actually industrial organizational psychology, which most people aren't familiar with.
Yeah. Do you want to just give us a little rundown of what that means?
Yeah, very briefly, it's the, kind of the science and the practice behind all of those things within organizations, from the organizational level, when you're looking at things like organizational culture, change management, to the people levels, where you're looking at the science behind how do we recruit and select and train and do performance appraisals. How do we do those things best based on the evidence? So it really prepared me very well, more than I could have anticipated for the work that I eventually went into. My goal was always to bring that work back to nonprofit organizations, because that had been my experience. I'd done a lot of volunteering along the way and seen kind of how some of the nonprofits had been decimated when, decades ago, when they took that tack and said, oh, we have to run this like a business. And it really drove a lot of people out and took away the heart of a lot of the work. So that was kind of one of the things I wanted to bring back, and along the way found a different path than I anticipated.
I think it's really important that we look at what, who people are beyond the work that they do, and behind even like what they're, both the work that they do to earn a living, but also the work that they do to contribute into their community, because I think it really shapes the way that we show up for both of those roles. And I think about the work that you do. We've talked about this before, but the work that you do where you help people work on their own ability to listen, their own ability to recognize when people are asking things of them, their own ability to be available, their own availability to show, or ability to show up, and really know how to communicate what they can and can't do. Because I think, when we talk about things like DEI, sometimes it can be really scary, because like, I don't even know if I can do the things you want me to do. Yeah. And instead of saying that, people will avoid it, or they try to supplement, or they try to do, some other tactic that they think will quell the mass. But no, really, it's just their own inability to say, I don't know what that looks like. I don't know what that means. I don't know how to do this. Because we expect so much of our leaders to know all the answers and all that kind of stuff, right? But the work that you do really goes into who they are as people outside of their roles to help them show up in their roles.
Yeah, it really starts with kind of holding up a mirror so people can see an assessment that helps hold up a mirror so that people can see where they are along a particular developmental continuum. That tells us where you are in your mindset and your comfort and capacity in interacting across the differences between us. And then we can use that information, right, to figure out, okay, so what's your path? What are the strengths of where you are? What are some of the challenges that you face? And what is some of the things that we can do to expand the lens that you currently have on your world, right, built by your personal lived experience and trajectory in the world? And how can we expand that further? Because once you better understand how your lens on the world was shaped, you can, that gives you information. You're like, oh, not everybody had that same experience, so their lens isn't shaped the same way. So let's think about where their lens came from. Once you can begin to, increase your capacity for that critical self-reflection, and then learning that next step, that the curiosity, right? Mm-hmm. The cultural humility, and some of these other aspects, the openness, the ability to sit with the discomfort when you don't know the answers. Some of these skills and that help them.
And stay in the room while you do that. Because Absolutely. As soon as sometimes we leave, and there's like things where people just need some time. But the thing is that once you leave and shut that door, you stop that communication. So it's like how to be in the room while still being uncomfortable.
Absolutely. And it's not something that we're great at, right? Especially in the face of other people. It's one thing taking it on ourselves. That's hard enough work. Doing it in front of and interaction with other folks, which is what this requires, is that much harder. So it's really learning that process and learning to be okay with that discomfort, and having the skills to push through it in a way that's going to be productive for you and the folks you're interacting with, whether that's folks in your family you've got differences with, whether that's folks in your community and folks at work, right? So that development that I focus on really, while we talk about it in terms of your role in the workplace for DEI, it's really overall development that's going to be helpful in any of your relationships, depending on how you apply it, of course.
Yeah, and I think this is a really interesting conversation where we talk about inclusivity. Inclusivity is not just for other people. Inclusivity is for ourselves as well. And so it's when we're including ourselves in the conversation, not overtaking, not controlling it, and not being a passive listener as well. It's being an active listener so that you are still a part of that conversation. To me, that's really being in the room as well. Like, it is really showing up for yourself, but also showing up for the other people who are in the room and saying, okay, I'm going to be here and I'm going to listen and I'm going to be part of the solution. Not just, I'm going to let you figure out the solution and I'll do it. Not just, okay, I'll figure out the solution and then you'll be good with it. It is like an ongoing conversation, an active collaboration to creating the way forward.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And really that first step of just having that little boost of confidence so that you can stay, so that you can, first of all, put your foot in the door if you're not in the room yet, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that you can get in the room. Being willing to sit there, being willing and able to be fully present, which is so hard, right? In today's world and today's society and today's workplace, when there are so many demands on our attention, right? It's so easy to be distracted. But what does that really mean for us, as well as for the people in the room with us, when we can be fully present, when we can attend to both ourselves, right? That self-reflection piece. What's going on with us? Am I really focused on what's going on here? Am I thinking ahead? Am I listening, or am I listening to respond? So being present and thinking about my presence in the room, but also being able to attend to the other folks in the room, right? Is really an important skill and something, like I said, that we have to try a little harder to do in our society when we are being pulled in so many different directions and our attention spans are shortened because the word limits and the video clips and the constant stream of small bits of information. So how do we get past that to be totally present in ourselves, totally present along with the people who are there with us, so that we can use that space to also listen and learn better how to continue to interact and communicate with those people there.
Yeah. I mean, I know before I got diagnosed with ADHD, I worked in a corporate setting. And the reality is that I also have a little bit of narcolepsy. And so what can happen is if it's boring or my brain isn't actively engaged, like I'm listening to someone else, I just fall asleep. And that's super awkward. I will tell you that. I had my boss, basically I worked in a healthcare situation. She's like, I think we need to take you for a sleep test. So we're going to get you into that because something's happening. I'm like, oh God, like I was just like, I'm like 22. I'm like so embarrassed, I don't know why. And then, luckily she was like, I feel like there's something going on here because you just fall asleep at it. Like you're there and then suddenly you're gone. So go for a sleep test, get narcolepsy. But then later on, I get diagnosed with ADHD. But prior to that, one of the things I would communicate to people is like, we're having a meeting and I'm so excited for you to tell me I'm going to be doodling in my book. And it's not that I'm distracted. In fact, if I stop doodling, that's when you have to be worried. But if I'm doodling, I am very into what you're saying. It's just how I'm going to process and I'm going to keep present. And it was really interesting having that conversation because there was always somebody who was like, that seems weird. And I was like, see the results. And then, like it's partly it's them being open and also sitting with their own uncomfortableness because I could see them watching me doodling. I could see them going, oh, she's not even paying attention. Whereas I was. you know, and part of that doodling was also me forming ideas for them. And then when it came time, they're like, so what do you think? I'm like, excellent. Here's what we're going to do. And then I'd outline this whole plan and they're like, oh, she was listening. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But it needed that conversation of being in the room. It needed me to communicate that. And it needed me to make it like no big deal. Right. So it's just like, this is not going to, if you think this is going to impact you, just wait. You know, I got this for you. Right. But it was part of that. And it was about me being uncomfortable too, saying, I need this in order to be present for you. Right.
Right. Because otherwise the assumptions, like had you not been in a healthcare setting, right?
Yeah.
What would the assumptions have been made about that behavior? Instead of saying, hey, let's go get this assessed, what would have happened from there? And what, based on those judgments, what decisions would people have made about you and your place in your career? So, right, the first step is being present, listening and learning, doing it and trying to withhold judgment,
Yes.
especially when we don't know, right?
Yes.
Because there's so much that we don't know about the people in the room with us. There are so many assumptions that we make based on what we see externally. So one of those skills is also withholding those assumptions until we learn more about that person, and continuing to expand our knowledge of how different people operate in the world so that we can begin to temper the assumptions that we do make, right? So the whole education system has been teaching teachers for how long not to let the kids do that kind of thing, doodle in the classroom. So we're taught all along from very young that those behaviors are not acceptable. Hopefully that's changing to some extent, but not everywhere. That's for certain. But that's part of the task, right? So listening, learning, withholding judgment, and continuing to learn more about people who are and may show up differently in the world in the ways that we do, and using those as opportunities then to learn about them and further connect.
Mm-hmm. So I have said this before. I think you're an incredible, valuable member of the Catalyst, and I'm really thankful that you're in there because you definitely give us opportunities to learn and to explore. But I know that you're showing up in other rooms across your work and your volunteer work and all the things that you give. Greta, why is it important that you're in the room, that you get to be in the room?
So some feedback I've actually gotten over the years, I didn't necessarily realize I was doing this until I heard it from other people. I ask, I've been very fortunate to be in rooms where we're talking about stuff that I really care about doing and where people are not just sitting around the table, but we're actually working together. So that changes the dynamic compared to a lot of meetings people have to sit through. But in those, paying very close attention because I care about the subject matter deeply, and I'm able to ask really good questions, right? So asking good questions about the things that aren't being said, asking good questions about the assumptions being made and the decisions people are making, and sometimes asking questions about who's in the room and who's not in the room, and why. Mm-hmm. Right. So that we continue to expand that conversation, especially related to the topics we were talking about. For years, I worked just specifically in areas of health disparities and health equity issues. So these conversations it was really critical piece of that conversation, because a lot of times the decision makers, if you're in a decision maker's room, don't represent the people they're making decisions for, about, without. And that was a really important piece of the conversations to me that we had, and really changed significantly the trajectory of some of the work that we have done along the way.
I've seen that so many times, both in healthcare and other industries, where they're like, we're going to create this program. We're going to create this, for marginalized communities. And it's like, where's your marginalized community representation that actually said, 1, they need it, 2, what it would look like, 3, how is it delivered? How are they supposed to be engaged in it? And none of them, right? They're just like, a certain demographic of folks who decided that they're going to check off a box. And meanwhile, they're not creating something that is actually useful. They're not creating something that, is really meeting the needs. They're just trying to check a box. And I think that's an example of not being in the room. That's an example of standing outside the room and deciding what's going on in the room. Never mind inviting the people in the room that should be there. They're not even in the room themselves. They've created this little alcove outside the room because they don't even want to hear what's going on in there. And then they've made the decisions to board up the door or to change the door or change what's in the room without being in the room. So I think it's a really interesting when you said, I'm asking who should be in the room and why they're not there, because this is bold, right? This is like, we can say like, how come Jane's not here? We need Jane. But to actually say, why were they not invited? And coming at it not as an accusation, but a really strong exploration of why this was overlooked, whether it be intentional or not. It is an opportunity to explore within ourselves why we never even had that idea.
Or if people, so whether quite often it's people who are overlooked and are not represented at the table, because oftentimes these meetings are happening at higher levels where we know there are great disparities and that the folks in those positions don't often represent the folks that they're serving. So that's an important component. The other piece is if they were invited and they didn't come, why?
Absolutely. That's right.
Is that's been a really important part of some of our conversations along the way, because it brought up, hey, there's some conflicts here with this community. And like, well, then we have to fix that first. We have to address that first.
Yeah.
And see if there's potential to repair before we move forward on this. People don't always appreciate when you're asking those questions, and somebody has to. If we're truly committed to doing the work in a way that is most effective for those who need it the most, which in the end ends up, generally serving everybody better.
It's really interesting. I think it was like a year or two ago in the body liberation camp, somebody had basically put out that they were going to be a keynote speaker at this conference, and this person is not a fat person at all. And basically they said, if I didn't do it, it would go to somebody else that doesn't even bring, like, at least I bring people up on the stage with me. And if I didn't do it, it would go to someone who didn't bring up anybody on the stage at all. And it was like, what? So you are saying that it's better it goes to you because you're willing to bring a chair up on the stage with you for a small part of it, than actually say, hey, I think this person is a much better keynote speaker. How do we get them on the stage? Right. And I thought it was such a pivotal moment for me to be like, oh, yeah, it's not enough just to have some of the check boxes, right? Like, how do we actually make this inclusive and not just like the safe person in the room? We really do want the people who are asking those questions that make us uncomfortable, that are challenging our beliefs, and it doesn't mean you have to leave the room to make room.
Oh, absolutely. And I feel like we do that all the time in meetings, whether it's community, whether it's volunteer, whether it's stuff we do at work, make decisions for people who are not represented in the room and assume that somebody else is representing them.
Absolutely.
Say, well, that's this person's job. They work for this organization. That's not the same thing. And if you're choosing to do that, what further work do you need to do so that when you're making decisions, you're allowing it to be informed by the community that's not at the table, right? So if that means stopping and you have to do outreach to those groups so that you're specifically getting feedback from people who are living that experience, then that's what you have to do. And it's not convenient. And doesn't allow you, to move forward at blazing speed. But if you get there fast and do the wrong thing, what does it matter? If you're truly trying to be inclusive, if you're truly trying to be equitable, that takes work.
It also takes some understanding. Like, I think there's this expectation that people are just like, well, I invited them and they didn't come. We've seen this in like conferences all the time. I would have a more diverse lineup if people applied, all those kind of things. And it's like, well, maybe you should realize why people are not applying. And maybe you need to look at how you actually reach people and how you compensate or, make it worth their time, because it's not enough just to get invited into the room so that people hear you. It's a waste of time if I'm invited and I tell you what's going on and then you do nothing with it. Or you are not, or you're never were prepared or anticipated that you could do something with it. Like, it's just not enough, right?
Oh gosh, yeah.
And now you've wasted my time. Now you have taken me away from other things that I could be doing that do actually have impact, just to satisfy your own like weird, self-absorbed, again, checkbox of things that you said that you did. And it's just not enough. Like, I'd rather they didn't do it at all.
Oh, and that's so true. I mean, and as if we need research to show that, but the research does show that you don't ask people for their voice if you're not going to use it, because then you're just causing further harm. You continue to cause further harm. So you have to be very conscientious about that entire process. It's the same. It's so similar to when you're recruiting people for your organization, right? For positions within your organization. A lot of people want to start with, well, we need more people, whatever, that represent this demographic in our organization. Well, that's great. Yeah. But what do you have in place within your organization, within your policies, within your practices, within your culture, that's going to keep them there? Or are you in a place that's going to make them uncomfortable from the beginning and send them away? So we have to make sure that as we're doing that, we're also prepared to truly, right, do the work that's going to create the environment that is inclusive for those folks, that actively gives them a voice, and that we're ready to do something about it and with it and incorporate that at the decision-making level.
And I would say I would encourage corporations, leaders, to be open that they're not available for that change. And I know it sounds, I'm a PR person, so like, if that it horrifies me on one level of the whole, idea that we have to be perfect. But the reality is that, again, we don't want to waste people's time. And there are other organizations out there that can be ready. And, maybe it's time that you let them do the thing they have to do. And then the people who want to create the change are going to go work with them. But it's going to be less frustrating for you and less frustrating for the people who are trying to help you create the change if you were just open about not being available. Mm-hmm. And just being saying, like, we can't do it right now. We do not have the infrastructure. We do not have the resources. We do not have the people in place in order to create the change you want. When we do, we can then reach out, but I'm not going to waste your time right now. And I think that's a stronger message than the weird, like, yeah, we hear you. Come in. We'll have a council. Well, yeah, you'll be a part of this council, and we'll meet with you 4 times a year, but we don't actually take any of your input. We don't actually take any, we don't use your ideas. We don't compensate you. We don't credit you. We don't, like, all of that kind of stuff. It's just like we don't have time for this anymore. Like, we just don't. So be open and be, that's part of being in the room too, though. Being in the room it's still okay to say, I don't have the resources to do this thing right now. That's still being in the room.
And then going that next step and working with someone to figure out, what can you do from where you are?
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Taking that next, because certainly not everybody's coming from the same starting point. So working with someone, whether it's internally or externally, to figure out where you really are, what resources and capacity you do have, and how to move forward from there. And that's an important part for those of us who work in the field as well, because a lot of these organizations, they want something, they want an in-the-box solution. And that is not what we need. What we need to do is to truly understand what's going on in that space, in that room, and figure out the way forward with that information, because the way forward isn't the same for everybody. Everybody's got a little different map, right? A little different blueprint because they're going to have different goals in the end as well. There are some consistencies, but it has to fit with who you are, what your goals are and the direction that you're trying to go. So that's something that both as practitioners as well, we have to be very aware of, and be ready to deal with the fact that to meet people where they are.
Yeah, I mean, coming back to being who we are, the reality is that if we try to implement something that really goes against who we fundamentally are, how we, our beliefs, our systems, our, the way we've always done the things, if we just try to leap into that next solution, it's not going to work. It's just going to be, it's going to be painful. It's other people will know that it's not working for us, and that has a ripple effect out, which I think is interesting. Coming back to the work that you do, is you're working with people who, like before you get to that point where you cause more harm that could be, irreparable, really coming into yourself and saying, am I ready to be in the room? Am I ready to show up and be there for the other people in the room? Am I ready to see who's not in the room with me, and, available to bring them in and to actually be there for them, not just for you? Because that's the other thing, is companies and organizations and leaders will bring in people as consultation for them, but it's like, what are you doing for them as well? Mm-hmm. Otherwise it's not fulfilling.
Yeah, and it's so interesting to see there's some really interesting conversations now happening about how we show up for folks as well, and how we support folks when they can't be in the room. So for example, there's really great conversations happening around the differentiations between, like teaching, coaching, mentoring, and then a sponsorship role. So in places where you're trying to increase the presence of certain demographics within, higher level positions in an organization, that requires active sponsorship from someone who's in those rooms, right? Mm-hmm. So how do we prepare those folks to be good sponsors? Because mentorship means helping bring that person along. Sponsorship is being in the room where they're not and bringing up their name and connecting them with opportunities and connecting them with people, and making sure that they're present in the rooms they can't be present in, to create those opportunities for that person. And those sponsors have to be prepared as well. So they're the ones in the room. So how are we helping ensure that they have the proper toolkit to play that role as well, and to not themselves do, and the same thing for mentors or whatever, to not do harm in the positions that they've been given, and to truly be able to rise to the roles that they've either chosen or been given along the way.
Yeah, so it's like a tactical strategy, right? It's like, if I want, if I want to do more anti-racism and equity work, I also have to be in the rooms to be in the rooms and be like, hey, you don't have this person in the room. We got to bring them in, and then like knowing when it's like, okay, bye, you guys got this. Okay. And then it's like, I go to the next room too. Cause it's not everybody can be everywhere at once. Right. And so it's like, then it becomes this teamwork. It's like, then it becomes a coalition to create the change, and actually implement and integrate the change. So it's like, okay, I always have to kind of think, I've got opportunities that I'm creating for myself, but opportunities that I'm also creating for other people. And it isn't like a saviorship. It is tactical. It's strategy.
Absolutely.
It's not like I need recognition for being in that room. It's just like, can I also, be on the lookout for people who have needs as well?
Absolutely. And that's part of that self-development piece too, to help ensure that it's not coming from a saviorship role, right? I'm here just to help pour them or pour you or pour whatever. That self-development piece that's going to help you differentiate your role from that otherwise harmful perspective that a lot of people fall into.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it can be hard to kind of recognize that. And I love that we have people like you who are holding up mirrors, and being able to see when that's like, oh, that's a great idea, but here's where you can make it even better and not fall into this kind of white saviorship or whatever that we tend to want to do. It's like, oh, well, I did this for so and so. No one cares. It's like, no one does, right? It's like if you're just there to get a pat on the back, then it's also not being in the room. It's you're there. But I love the idea of like strategic connections, right? Strategic. It's like, if I can meet this person, this person, who needs also to meet this person, because I might as well make the connection, and then it's just an easier time, right? And they're going to do the same thing for me in a future. Like, that's where we have this collaboration and connection and reciprocity that actually works, because we're not just trying to like make ourselves feel good about it. We're trying to actually do something together.
Yeah. And actually understanding how those dynamics work, right? I mean, there's the older story now about how women in the Obama administration kind of came together to raise up one another's voices, because recognizing the dynamic that often happens when women are in the room, where, they might say something and it's passed over and somebody else might bring it up, where they were very intentional about coming back and saying, oh, Marisa raised a very good point, and reiterating that message and continuing to be able to put people's messages forward. So when you're in a place where you can recognize what the dynamics are and work, I don't want to say with them, but within those dynamics to improve the position for others in the room and those who are outside of the room, then that's a great opportunity, that recognition and what truly being present and understanding what's happening there allows us to do.
Yeah, that was really interesting. Kate Spade put out a photo recently where it's a person basically looking over a hedge, but they're wearing a skirt, and you can tell, like, I would say in North America, you can very easily tell that it's very inspired by ribbon skirts and created by the indigenous cultures, and in particular one artist, actually. And people were basically, hey, it's your skirt, did you sell this like to Kate Spade? And like, they were being very like, but I love that it was just like a nice like, and like, the company had to basically, I mean, unfortunately, they had a really canned response, like, thanks for bringing this to our attention, like, boo earns. Liz Claiborne, Kate Spade, whoever owns Kate Spade now, I don't even know, but like, it was like, oh, that's too bad. But I loved how like the community were just like, it wasn't like it was just like, oh, hey, I love that you're showcasing this this person's art. Oh, wait, you're not, this is just your, and it was interesting. I love kind of that. It was like a communal band together of just like, hey, maybe we stop stealing from artists and cultures. Just a thought. Just in 2023 in this economy, like, maybe we just stop doing that. But again, it's just like that kind of that nod, right? It's that recognition that we do have a part, and to show up and not just like scroll on by, right? And just be like, it doesn't impact me. It's like where we can do what we can. That person commenting on that Facebook post, it might seem small, but it definitely made some waves. And I'm curious to see how the company responds and how the company moves forward. Best case scenario, start working with designers and pay them. You want to sell like those designs, but also recognize when it's not yours to sell. And it's not like we selling ceremonial outfits that are mean something and have sacred, like, no, we don't need to capitalize it. But work with indigenous artists, work with the original root. And I love that you said that in a meeting. It's like coming back to the root. Who started that idea? Bring it back to them. It's great that idea got put forward and the whole team ran with it, but let's bring it back to the root and actually give the credit and credence to it, because I think people get shuffled, right? And we don't need to do that anymore. Again, in 2023, in this economy, we just don't need to. And really, it's like we need to be able to look at ourselves of how we are in those situations. Again, how do we show up? How do we feel when somebody else has a better idea than us? How do we feel? Those things are not, we don't have to avoid examining them. We just don't. Like, it's time, like, be open. It's like, wow, that makes me feel uncomfortable that like someone else's idea makes me feel like a little less than. Oh, okay, well, let's talk about it. right? And let's
Yeah.
also talk about how you're included too. We're not pushing anybody out of the rooms. We're saying like, let's all get together. Let's create something here. But also, if it's not for you, get out of the freaking swim lane. That's the idea too. That's also part of being in the room, is knowing when to get out of the room and let people who are more qualified, more involved, more impacted than you, and then, like you said, sponsor. Like, okay, whatever that is, I got the cash, let's roll, right? Like, that's where we want to see people showing up too. That's a part of being in the room.
Yeah. And something I was working on a little bit earlier, and then a conversation that we had a little bit before, I also talked about, so what do you do when you're there, and the differences between like a healthy engagement and unhealthy engagement. So yes, if you are more present, and you have this new toolkit and you're better able to connect with your employees, you're better able then to support them in ways that are important to them, and in a better place to foster a healthy sense of engagement at work, right? Which is good for everybody. It's good for employee well-being, and it's good for, on the employer side as well. Whereas quite often, I think we were talking a little bit about the teacher strike and stuff, and how so many people rely on the fact that teachers are going to stay in that room, and all the support staff, not just the educators themselves, but all the support staff, stay for so long and put up with so much because of their commitment to those kids. And the minute they step away and say, you know what, this is not healthy for me. I also need to take care of myself and my family. How easy it is for them to become targets of people for standing up for themselves there. So in a way, they've maintained an unhealthy sense of engagement and an unhealthy level of commitment that's not supporting their well-being, and doesn't allow them to therefore bring as much to the kids that they're there to support overall. So the better as leaders that we can be at, identifying our roles in that, the better that we can be is truly understanding the needs of the folks that we're working for, that we're working with. The healthier we can be in the engagement with them, the better it works out for everybody in the end, instead of just relying on, folks who are going to show up 60 hours a week and run themselves into the ground because they have to have a roof over their heads and food on the table and everything else. How can we do that better? And how important is that when we really need to hang on, to those folks that we have in an organization, and how critical that is to keeping them in the room?
Well, the room is the room itself is just as important as being in the room. And I think it's really interesting you brought up, the teachers are being asked to go on strike in support of the drivers and the cafeteria staff and the custodial staff. And I think this is really interesting because a lot of times it's like, oh, you're going on strike, you're leaving the room. No, they've just been tired of not being invited into the room. And so now they're creating their own room, and now they're inviting the organization to be in their room. And it's an interesting, when we look at the dynamics of who chooses the room, and I'm talking about like, physical and metaphorical rooms, but it's like who chooses the room and who designs the room, right? All of that has very impactful repercussions. And I think it's really interesting. It's like you're asking someone to be in the room with you, but maybe you need to ask to be in their room. If you're hoping to actually be there for them, it's their room that you're asking to be invited to, and you let them lead the conversation and design the room, the container that they're comfortable in and that they maybe have power in. Because that's the thing, is as soon as you switch it, there is that power imbalance. And so I think that's I'm glad you brought up that example, because I think that's something that we don't talk about enough, is the actual room. I focus on room architecture all day long as part of the catalyst. I know that sounds really strange, but you said you came into that room and you're like, I don't know where to ask. Well, that the room itself impacts that, right? And that's one of the things, we just had a redesign and everyone came in and was like, one person was like, are these seats crushed velvet? Like, this is a virtual room. And people are like, I'm like, it is now. Like, you want those to be crushed? Yes, if that's what feels comfortable for you, right? And people are like, oh, I love these cozy chairs. I created one room that had 4 tables, and I thought it'd be awesome because people could move around the other components of the room, the chat or the Pomodoro clock. And everyone was stressed out because they're like, well, what if I sit at a different table and someone thinks that I'm purposely not? I'm like, this is a virtual room. It doesn't matter. But it did matter. And I started thinking about this in not, this is a virtual world, but this is so reflected out into the world where it's like, oh, okay, I'm a leader of an organization, a corporation, and now I would like to invite a marginalized group in. You're inviting them into your office. Already, you've created a power imbalance, even though you think, oh, no, meet them where they're comfortable, meet them where they have their power, meet them where it is on their terms, and then be that part of that active listener. And again, like you said earlier, if they don't accept your invite or they don't offer an invite, that is speaking huge. Okay. It's a big wake-up call.
Absolutely. And it's so easy to be brushed aside. You see it happen all the time. But that's real information that you can follow up on. And sometimes it's just, this isn't of interest to me at this time. Well, then why isn't it? If we're doing it and we think it's for either it's not of interest or there's broken trust, right? Yeah. There's issues in need of repair. If what you're focusing on just isn't what's important to them, then that is really critical information that you need to know for moving forward and should be paying attention to. So yes, that attention to who's in the room, who's not, and why is everything if you attend to it with care.
I love it. Well, we just get together and we have all these like big, huge. So, working with you, I mean, talk about this, like how, if people want to, get a mirror on how they're in the room and how they're showing up in the rooms that they're both invited to or that they're creating, how do they work with you? How do they create that space? Because I think that's a really powerful conversation to have with you.
Yeah. So I'm very open. I love having these conversations with people because sometimes it's really hard coming into this to see yourself in it, right? And to see how it's going to benefit you because it's a little bit different for everyone, but there are some consistent things. Yeah. So that's why I offer like a 30-minute call, whatever. It's up on my LinkedIn, sign up, get on my calendar. Let's talk about it. And let's talk about how this might be beneficial to you and to your goals and to where you want to be and need to be. So then we'll, figure out a plan that works for you, whether that's for you as an individual, for you as your team. I really prefer to work with smaller groups because I think that's important for this piece of the work that I'm doing, as opposed to, kind of doing the whole organization at once.
Yeah.
So I'm really focused on those who are in leadership or management roles, but also other coaches, other consultants, and DEI folks doing this work that need that piece of it for themselves as well. Because a lot of people have been thrown into these roles or have taken that and have done other aspects of the work and are now being asked to take on DEI. This is a whole other skill set. Right. And it also requires a different mindset. And that's where we'll start. Start is examining that mindset. So there are for kind of corporate, I have some packages and rates that are available on my website. But I'm also, have this whole set that just let's call and let's talk about it because it really is about tailoring this to your needs, your needs of your team, of your organization.
Yeah, it's not just about correcting things. It's about what would make it even better, because we all start from where we are, and we're all in mastery of these types of things because things are changing all the time. We're getting more information. We're getting more people to the tables. So it's an opportunity to make this even better and to keep on that mastery route.
Right. And that's why I really like this developmental approach, because it doesn't say that where you are is wrong. It's like you have strengths that have specifically developed for where you are. And there's an opportunity. Where are the challenges coming in? How are they showing up for you in your relationships, in your interactions, in your workplace. And then let's talk about what forward movement looks like and develop a blueprint for growth that's specific to you, your curiosities, because we want people to stay interested and motivated, and your goals, so that it is really relevant. Whatever we're doing going forward is relevant, and I can help support you along the way so that you have those tools moving forward and can use them. So whatever new thing gets thrown your way, you now have this toolkit that you can continue to use for whatever new thing or whatever change in the world comes. You have those basics that you can go back to and say, okay, all right, I recognize this. This is outside of my comfort zone, or this isn't something I know. Let's apply this method, this process, so that I can learn more about it and become more comfortable in this area. And I'm generally more comfortable managing those differences overall when they appear.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you, Greta. I can't thank you enough for being in the room and the catalyst. Like I said, you're definitely such a valuable member, and I really appreciate you there. And thank you for coming on the podcast. I will also mention, if you do want to see Greta, I'll put on the link here. I'm going to put it up but it is Greta Lax, GretalaxLLC.com. Greta's also on LinkedIn. So please check Greta out and join the conversation. Start talking about this. If you're not ready, to be working with someone like Greta, just start participating in the conversations. That's a part of being in the room too, and just really contributing where you're at and where you're going. It's so essential. So thank you again, Greta. I really appreciate you.